Next, we'll hear a keynote from the General Manager for EMEA at GumGum. He's joining us from London. I tried to summarize what GumGum is, but I think I would do a bad job, so I'll leave this up to him. And he will discuss why AI is the antidote to dwindling addressability. I'm really curious what that is, and how advanced technologies are reshaping digital advertising. Please welcome Peter Wallace. Peter, the stage is yours.
Hello. Thank you for the introduction, Denise. I'm massively impressed by your role change there. I hear she's going to be DJ later on this evening. Look, what I'm hoping to achieve in my session is to convince everybody here that actually the move towards cookieless and dwindling addressability actually can be seen as a positive, whether that be for people or whether that be for brands. Hopefully you'll learn something. Hopefully this is interesting, and we can chat about this afterwards. But first and foremost, I will try to press the right button. And just to give a very, very quick introduction on who GumGum are. So we are a global digital technology business, focused corely on three things: contextual, attention, and creative, underpinned by a huge data asset, which we call the Mindset Graph. At our core, we are about driving brand outcomes. We're about cookieless targeting through contextual and measuring success based on attention. As I say, we are global. For those of you who are from Germany, we have a Hamburg and Düsseldorf office, and very, very present over here. But into the core of this. So the advertising world is changing. Addressability is dwindling, and it's been dwindling for years. I think Google are a sponsor, so I can't really say anything about cookieless with regards to Google, so I'll try and avoid things. But look, regardless of decisions from certain businesses around cookieless deprecation and everything else, like cookies have been dwindling regardless, and there's been a lot of changes going on in the industry that fundamentally is changing the way in which we are thinking about reaching consumers, understanding consumers as brands, as agencies. It's created a bit of panic. But again, I'm here to say, like, don't panic. Like, there are solutions for this. We're really, really well set as an industry to keep calm, carry on, and actually do better than what we've arguably been doing in the past. Signal loss. So really, this is another word for sort of cookieless. It's sort of encapsulating more broadly sort of the changing landscape around addressability. So signal loss is something that is absolutely reshaping the way in which we're thinking about the industry. Advertisers saying that the makeup of their organization is being impacted by signal loss, and 66% of advertisers expect a reduction in their ability to deliver personalized advertising. Now, it's interesting to talk about personalized advertising because, again, we've had this perception of what personalized advertising should be as brands, as advertisers, as marketeers. And I think there needs to be a moment now where we step back and go, actually, like, the way that we were thinking about personalized advertising in the past, is that appropriate? Is that how consumers want to be interacted with from brands? Is that actually driving the best possible change and uplift by communicating in that sort of personalized fashion? I think there's a big question mark that needs to be answered in and around that. And from my perspective, what I think we've done is we've created this matching problem through the way in which we've operated as an industry. So by trying to operate in that personalized fashion and trying to get to that really sort of uber, like one-to-one targeting approach, and using data that arguably, one, consumers don't necessarily want brands and marketeers to get a hold of, but two, data that is based off of legacy, based off of history of what people have been doing in the past, has created this idea of a matching problem where actually brands and consumers or consumers aren't feeling a level of affinity towards brands that we're really hoping to achieve through investment. And that's been caused by a number of different things, but fundamentally what it's doing is it's wasting ad dollars. So we've got to a point where actually we're trying to create advertising experiences that are based on data that consumers don't want to give. We're delivering creative experiences that don't attach to a good user experience, and we're creating negative perceptions between brands and consumers. So we're starting to create a world where arguably advertising gets a little bit frowned upon by consumers, which, again, that's not what advertising is here to do. It's not what it's there to achieve. Everybody invests advertising in order to create a connection between brand and consumer. So we need to start rethinking how we approach what we do as an industry. And that in itself means that we need to rethink the way in which we use data, and we need to rethink the way in which we're creating that match between a brand and a consumer. Here's a good example, hopefully recent and seasonal example.
Black Friday almost upon us. Many of you plan to find a perfect holiday present for that special someone.
But imagine having that gift surprise spoiled by an online ad. Well, according to the digital advertising firm GumGum, this has happened to 1/3 of us. So how does this occur? Websites can track your browsing history, so a family member that shares a computer or tablet can see the same ads pop up for a gift someone earlier bought or viewed. To avoid the issue altogether, 16% of respondents said they purposely don't browse holiday gifts online.
Interesting.
That's true. You can just be talking about it. You and I could talk about something.
Yeah, it's going to
pop
get
up on
an
your
advertisement.
Yeah.
Now, firstly, you'd think that people are more familiar with the idea of private browsing when they're looking at certain things on the internet. But look, that example there from the news, which is over the last couple of weeks, points to the fact that, again, data is being misused, and we're creating experiences where advertising is being delivered to the wrong person in the household, or advertising is based on a browsing history which maybe is no longer relevant to that person that was looking at it in the first place. So again, it's time for us to rethink the way in which we tackle the industry from a targeting perspective, and the way in which we try and drive outcomes from creating matches between brands and consumers. And to my point around going cookieless actually is a positive. I think it all harks back to this, right? It's this idea that we need to reform and rethink the way in which we're using data. And we need to think about consumers in that very moment in time, rather than what they've been doing in the past, rather than trying to put them into a very specific demographic bucket and assuming that they are a specific individual based on a very broad number of criteria. Now, what I would term where we have been in the past as is this idea of an identity era. So we've been trying to create identities based on that type of data. Now, where we really need to start heading towards is this idea of the mindset era. So this is where we start to perceive individuals as individuals. We start to perceive that somebody is interested in something at that very moment in time, not what they were interested in however long ago it might have been. In the panel, there was talk about dwindling attention spans. There's micro moments in which you're able to engage and drive an outcome, drive attention from an individual, and you need to identify what that moment is and invest in it and make sure that you create that connection. So the way in which we are going to enter into this mindset era is fundamentally going to be driven by AI technologies. Now, you can see here in the Ad Age article this idea of the targeting crisis and how ad tech are responding. The response to this is, yes, fundamentally driven by AI technology, but the one thing that I will caveat on that is it shouldn't be AI technology that tries to pull us back into the things that we've been doing in the past. As I said in this slide earlier, we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity to rethink the way in which we're doing things. This brings in a new moment for us to operate as an industry, which is really, really exciting, and it creates an equitable opportunity between brands and consumers, where actually there's a value exchange between both parties. And what we very much expect to see is that if you operate in an equitable way through use of data, through user experience, that there's going to be better outcomes, there's going to be more affinity towards advertising, and fundamentally brands are going to benefit from this, and consumers will also embrace the open web and advertising more readily as a result. Now, what you can see here is an example of the types of data that can be pulled from a digital asset. So here you can see obviously a video playing. So before we had Catch Me If You Can, that's the name of the film. You can see here we can pull out the sentiment of that media. We can pull out what it's talking about. We can pull out the mood. We can pull out the threat categories. So the reason why I'm showing this is it's a really great gauge of the type of data signals that are available in real time based on what the consumer is looking at that very, very moment in time. Now, if I can determine that across the entirety of the open web, actually, all of a sudden, I can start to piece together this idea of mindset, understanding of brands across the open web, how they're being discussed, what the associations are to those brands, and start to create this incredible understanding of a brand, of how they're being talked about, actually where the interest is, competitive interest. There is so much to be garnered from this idea, this way of thinking, through use of data signals that don't require cookies. Data signals that actually consumers are very readily and happy to pass. Like, this puts us into this incredible place. Now, what this really starts to enable is that if I can understand how a brand is being talked about and actually what that user is interested in and how what message is going to resonate with them in that very moment in time, it means I can start to find this brand alignment. And actually, I can understand at the moment when Danone needs to appear in front of a certain user because, obvious example, maybe they're reading about fitness, and therefore, actually, they're likely to think about their hydration. But actually, you can start to dig into this deeper and deeper and deeper by understanding things like the communities that exist in the way that brands are being talked about. And again, in the panel, there was a brief chat about communities that exist and subsets and understandings of brands that you might not be able to surface through traditional ways of thinking. So, look, this idea of the mindset era is something that is driving better brand outcomes, and for me is the way in which we should be operating as an industry. Now, what we as a business have created off the back of this is something that we term the mindset graph. Sorry, I'm keeping on my Danone brand. There you go. Thank you, Patrick. So fitness and also speaker points where, you're feeling a little bit parched at the front. Sorry, you really heard that up the front, didn't you? So look, this idea of the mindset graph is this understanding that actually through contextual and attention data signals that we have this huge, broad, deep understanding of what is going on across the open web. We can start to understand the interconnectivity between different data signals and contextual signals. So I'll keep on my Danone segment here. Sorry, Patrick, this wasn't pre-planned. If Danone is being talked around in the health and fitness industry, what are the other categories that associate with that? And smart water, like how are smart water being talked about in the open web? Actually, can I start to take some understanding of how my competitors are being discussed? And maybe smart water, for whatever reason, is more associated to the business industry for one reason or another, and we can start to dig into that. Actually, the mindset graph and this idea of contextual understanding across the open web garners such a rich amount of understanding. This idea of dwindling addressability all of a sudden is propped up in such an incredible future-facing way that isn't going to be obstructed by things like cookieless or privacy legislation. And some examples that we did pull out from the graph just to talk about and to sort of highlight how this comes into practice is here for an example with Boucheron. We were pulling the data for this in advance of a meeting, and it's like, they're talking about beekeeping. Why are they talking about beekeeping? And actually, it's this slightly random realization that the 1%, all of a sudden, it's become very trendy for them to work into beekeeping and have that as a hobby in the side. So again, thinking about sort of subcategories, thinking about subsets of how brands and their consumers are operating. I'm probably not going to sit there and suggest that Boucheron should do a massive beekeeping campaign, but it is just an interesting highlight of actually what you can garner from this type of data. Through to Next. Actually, there's a heavy link between Next and the crafting industry. So actually, it's people who are trying to find cost-efficient ways to upscale, if you like, their garments, and actually how can they get their old clothes and start to reuse that in new and interesting ways. And actually that creates a way in which Next maybe starts to think about recycling and their approach to green, what word am I looking for? To recycling and more efficient ways of operating as a business. And last but by no means least, Kenvue. Massive association with Kenvue and their baby products with pop culture and style. So it's talking about actually there is a huge impact of social media influences on Kenvue and particularly baby products. I could not tell you who, I think that's Sabrina somebody or other on the right-hand side. Anybody know? No? There we go, doesn't matter. Anybody? There we go, that person. So clearly not my category. But look, again, what we're saying here is we're surfacing new and interesting ways in which we can think about brands and think about the way in which we're going to target consumers and create that mindset match. So we can see that actually if you start to grab a hold of this data, all of a sudden you've got these amazing planning insights that you can take through to activation. And before, when we were hearing from Heineken, we were also talking a little bit about creative optimization. So again, thinking about the way in which AI can influence, yes, targeting, understanding, and addressability, arguably we also start to lose an element of addressability and understanding of performance within creative metrics. But actually, through things like attention tracking, we're very, very readily able to start to understand where attention is being given to different parts of creative. So all of a sudden, this can start to really inform my creative strategy in the way in which I think about A/B testing, the way in which I think about getting higher levels of brand outcome as a result of adjusting my creative message. So what I've got here is an example of how attention on this ad unit changes over the course of the time that the ad is in view and through the animation. So what you can then start to think about is actually maybe attention peaked at the start of the animation, which is great, which means that I hit things off with a bang. But maybe my brand logo isn't in view until the very end of the animation. So it's great that we got loads of attention to begin with, but nobody knows who the ad is for because actually attention had dropped by then and somebody had taken their eyes off the screen. So all of a sudden you've got this AI optimization engine to think about, yes, your consumer, but also the way in which you're going to maximize that opportunity to engage with that consumer through optimizing your creative messaging and the way in which you deliver that so that you get attention at the right moments and that you maximize attention for that brand. Now, what does this mean in practice? So one of our most recent case studies is with Kärcher, a good German brand, and actually something as I become more middle-aged is something that I've become more and more interested in. I think everybody wants a power washer when they reach a certain age, and apparently I've reached that age. What we did with Kärcher is we did this deep understanding of actually what resonates with Kärcher across the open web. So we understood, of course, home, garden, lifestyle, but also entertainment. There's also a subcategory of people like myself that reach an age and they want a black and yellow power washer. And we started to create these targeting segments as a result. And then what we did is we created our creative. We ran it through our creative attention tracker to understand actually how attention was going to be influenced based on the different elements of the creative. And we optimized. What we then looked to do is understand the brand uplift for the exposed users, and we split those exposed users into high versus low attention users. Again, attention should be a proxy for a lot to do with brand outcomes. It's a conversation for another time. But what we saw through using the mindset graph from an insights platform and an optimization platform is huge levels of uplift. Now, I'm not talking uplift in regards to CTR and those types of things. I'm talking uplift that actually are proper brand outcomes. So using on-device research as a brand study partner in this instance, we saw the awareness across those who were responsible for purchasing home electrics increased by 13 points. Unaided brand awareness increased by 10 percentage points for those users who were of high attention, and 48% of those users who were high attention exposed to the ad were looking to take some form of action off their exposure. So actually, when you think about the brand outcomes achieved through this, and through using this element of data through to activation, optimization, and outcomes, it works incredibly well. We're not using anything which would be traditionally bucketed under this idea of addressable media. And actually, we're doing something that consumers are good with, and we're fundamentally creating a match between brand and consumer to drive better outcomes. So, wrapping things up, like, signal loss is a thing. Like, it's happening, but it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Like, so keep calm. AI is the solution, and those solutions are here, and they're ready to go. They are going. And what you're going to do by embracing this is drive that match between brand and consumer, and fundamentally your investment in media dollars is going to be far better invested and drive better outcomes and better performance, and you're going to drive better connections. That is it from me. Thank you.